Strings of Malice, Book 1. Snowflake in an Alley. An Old Mother Nonsense Story. Chapter 18. Awakening the Rose. On the opposite side of the fetid cathedral, Lunrith woke to a sound no one would have heard if they weren't used to beatings when they didn't wake at the whisper of a thought. A dark figure stood over him, and he managed to put his arm up in time to catch the blade that had been aimed at his heart. It sliced through his flesh and burned something awful, but he couldn't scream to warn his friend. Thank the gods above and below they had only sent one person to kill them. Lunrith managed to push the priest back with some effort and reached for his sword. The figure was sprightly, for such a frail-looking man, and managed to catch himself and lunge again with a shout in that infernal tongue. Even cut short by his almost victim's blade settling up between his ribs, that cry was what finally woke the doctor. The priest grinned as he died, not realizing he had been stabbed until after his body slumped, and Dr. Grosquares rushed over to pull the bleeding corpse off and away from his friend. In the short scuffle, the would-be assassin's dagger had found a mark in Lunrith's forearm and shoulder. It hadn't gone too deep, but it was definitely bleeding in ways a body really shouldn't. Lunrith stopped the gentleman when he tried to pull it out, and the doctor babbled curses and profanities in at least 4 different languages. He tore up the dead man's robes to use as makeshift bandages, using the pin beneath the embroidered rose on the sleeve to pin the improvised bindings in place. "We need to get you to Nimue," the doctor insisted, hurriedly checking the door to make sure there were no others coming for them. There were. "Damn it!" he hissed, slamming it shut and putting his back against it. "Lunrith, quickly!" The doctor placed his hands against the old wood, and his eyes glowed as he desperately bit out a spell. Dragging up the magic to make it work looked about as painful as pulling teeth, but his hound was at his side in an instant. Outflick must have given up something, because the omen shrank to the size of a puppy, and magic bled out of her, to light up the door in a violet glow, complete with the symbol of Nimue's shield. The doctor scooped up the pup and flung open the door, revealing a void of silvery strings behind it. Lunrith managed to get to his feet and was unceremoniously shoved through the opening. The doctor followed on his heels and, as the door closed behind them, the advancing priests burst in, to find the room empty. Where they ended up was less ideal. The void spat them out of the door into the chapel. Standing before them, Nimue held a large book. Her eyes were red with magic that was not her own. Her face was slack and limp, save for a small, pinched frown between her eyes. She was fighting whatever it was that had overcome her, but was as yet unsuccessful.
"How wonderful of you to join us!"
Father Gekosh's raspy voice practically purred from behind Nimue.
"The rose will be hungry when she wakes, and I am sure she will be most pleased to be presented with so many sacrifices to choose from."
The 2 men were quickly restrained, as they were swarmed by robed priests, and the ones who were killed or wounded in the process were immediately dragged off into the deep shadows of the chapel, where much squelching and "Don't spill it!" echoed off the stone floor and walls. Lunrith's swords were forced from his grip after he was tackled to the floor, and the doctor did not put up much of a fight. Their wrists were bound, and Nimue could not hear her friend's cries for her to snap out of it. She simply stood, unseeing, when the men were dragged into the darkness of the shadows. Blades at their throats and forced to their knees, they heard Father Gekosh declare from behind them,
"It is time!"
There was a palpable change in the air as he addressed his congregation of almost 4 dozen practitioners.
"My brother and sister thorns!"
His voice bounced around the cavernous hall, rasp and all.
"It has been many years since our beloved white rose was so cruelly taken from us. We all failed to protect her from the blade that pierced her heart. Only I, her favorite thorn, discovered the method to keep her spirit tethered away from the clutches of death. For that, you appointed me guardian of our faith until her return. This night, our years of devotion will be rewarded."
Excited whispers and murmurs eagerly agreed, and the shuffling of feet revealed so many more inhabitants to this place than the company had initially thought.
"Even the Dark Father,"
the old priest continued,
"has seen our unwavering dedication and sent one of his own as a sacrifice to revive our beloved Rose."
Oohs and ahs flitted around the crowd Lanrith could not see, and he shoved backwards in an attempt to dislodge his captors, but they were strong, and the blade at his neck dug harder into his skin, drawing blood past the scars. As the father preached on, one of them bent down to hiss in Lanrith's ear.
"Try that again, and your friend dies before his time."
Lanrith froze at the threat a moment before a scream rang out, and a flash of heat from somewhere behind him caused concerned murmurs to rise. They were harshly vanquished when Father Gekos reprimanded them for their lack of faith so close to salvation.
"Sacrifice is necessary,"
he declared,
"in the name of our white rose. It is no cause for sadness or despair."
A hush fell over the crowd as he continued in a gentler tone.
"Priestess of the Dark Father, our moonlight in a time of great sorrow, ascend the stairs and perform the spell. Wake our white rose from her deathless slumber."
The woman walked forward, priests and shadows alike parting the way for her. The tome in her hands glowed with divine magic that chased away the darkness to reveal a desecrated altar. Its old markings were peeled off or scratched out, leaving only vague outlines of where they used to be. In their place, wilted once white roses hung limply around it, and 3 live horrorlings were strung up above the body. Lanrith and the doctor could now identify the lifeless form of a woman atop the altar. Her skin was ashen and stretched tightly around her bones. For all the world, she was dead, but there was no decay that they could see in the pale light. Nimue stood beside her now, entranced. A magic far greater than the priest's was now compelling her. She picked up the knife and placed it on the woman's chest, blade pointing to her chin and hilt above where her hands crossed over her belly. A wind from an unknown power opened the book, and she began to read.
"The rest are we going to do?"
Dr. Grosquares hissed softly.
"I will not end the first drink of some cultist's sick fascination with mortality."
Lanrith didn't know. He couldn't free himself from the grip his guards had on him, and he didn't have any way of breaking the spell on the priestess to stop this. He looked up at the ceiling, silently praying for a miracle, even a small one, for the opportunity to escape this. He had someone he desperately wanted to see again, and a hand slapped the back of his head, and a hissed threat to not waste his energy knocked his gaze back down, but not before he caught a glimpse of pale skin and scampering feet above them. Lanrith tried not to give away his discovery, and he silently thanked whichever angel had heard. His guard had taken the knife away from his neck to hit him, and hadn't put it back. His muscles tensed to act, but the magic that had been accumulating around Nimue flickered bright red. She raised her hand to the horrorlings, and the dagger flew across each of their throats, spilling gallons of blood down onto the body that lay below. The roses perked up and began to glow softly, as the red iron was soaked away by the vines and seeped into the corpse. It was enough to plump its skin, but not yet enough to wake her.
Damn it, damn it, damn it!
Dr. Grosquares cursed beside him, panic growing in his voice.
She'll lose her magic! The Umbra priests, They can't sacrifice to another. It is one of their worst. Ouch!
A priestess had smacked the doctor across the face.
Shut your mouth,
she hissed darkly.
It won't matter who her god is when she's dead.
Lunrith's eyes went wide at the implication of her words, and he began to struggle harder when the ritual knife flew back into Nimue's hand.
Nimue, don't!
The doctor managed to shout before a hand was slapped over his mouth and muffled his pleas. It wasn't much, but it was enough to make the woman pause with the knife at her own throat. It was cue enough for Irinka to drop from the rafters, and she landed on the priestess's shoulders. The fall should have sent them both tumbling to the floor in a mess of broken limbs, but it didn't. The mouse seemingly floated into position, managing to slip the curve of her own blade along the ritual one and flicked it away. Nimue reached up to drag the girl off her, and the two started to wrestle.
Kill them!
Father Gekosh yelled at his congregation, but Lunrith had already managed to slip free and grab a short sword off the one who had held him. He slashed as he stood, and the man's head tilted back, spraying blood. The doctor threw his head back, breaking the nose of the priestess who had smacked him earlier. He grabbed her weapon while she still clutched at her nose, howling in pain. He flailed the thing uselessly, but unpredictably enough that the others hesitated getting too close to him. Father Gekosh shouted out his order again, cowering his congregation as he rushed up the stairs to the altar and scooped up the ritual knife from where it had dropped.
This chance will not go to waste,
he growled as he cut shallowly into his wrist and held it over the body's mouth.
We will!
The priest's threat died as quickly as it had begun, when his arm came off his body, torn entirely from his shoulder. It was flung away into the pit of worshippers, hitting one of them so hard their neck broke with the force, and they dropped like a stone. The priest's mind eventually caught up, and he screamed, the sound so terrified and pain-filled, it stopped everything. He stumbled back, as though he could get away from the fact that his arm was gone, and tripped over his own feet, tumbling down the stairs to land in a heap. Not a moment later, the others followed him to their knees, as the body on the altar opened its eyes and took an audible breath. The proclaimed goddess sat up, slowly, deliberately, too smoothly for a normal person. The woman's eyes were dark, nearly black in the low light, as her gaze passed over those assembled. First, the woman who had awoken her. Nimue froze, despite not even knowing the White Rose had awoken. Her clenched fists were raised and ready to come down again on Irinka's broken face. The red glow faded from her eyes and she came back to herself, confused and scared. The girl beneath her was bloody and unconscious. Shock at what she had done immobilized Nimue. The risen Rose's ghostly eyes shifted around her chapel to finally land on the still screaming priest, the only sound in the now otherwise deathly silent space. Slowly, deliberately, she wiped away the drop of his blood that had touched her lips and spat the rest out onto the floor. It broke part of the spell that they were all under, because her thorns instantly bowed deeply to her. The shadows pulsed and visibly slithered away from her as she shifted around to stand. An angry frown had pinched her otherwise beautiful face, and her words dripped venom as she spoke to the man who had yet to stop screaming.
You thought your blood would be enough?
Gods above and below. Her voice sent shivers down the spine, like the fingers of death had plucked at her vocal cords in order to utter the sounds.
You thought your filthy, punitive insult of an offering would even be accepted?
She growled, showing off a mouth full of fangs. Many of her followers abandoned their faith at the sight and attempted to flee, but their attempts were thwarted as the doors to the chapel slammed shut under the very physical weight of her shadows. Slowly, deliberately, she descended the steps.
You, who has led my thorns astray and had the audacity to defile this body while I slept!
She was shouting now, and her wrath was a physical pressure that thinned the air and made it hard to breathe.
You dare to think that I would allow even one drop of your pathetic excuse of existence to sustain me?
Father Gekosh begged and pleaded past spittle and tears, but she only raised her hand over him and, slowly, deliberately, she twisted her fingers. The man started screaming for an entirely different reason, as he and every last thorn that had moved since she'd begun her descent joined in the most terrifying of hymns. Their bodies began twisting and contorting to unnatural degrees by a will and a magic far older and stronger than their own. They could do nothing but stare in shock and scream in horror as the soft hiss of her final judgment echoed over them.
You are not worthy.
Her fingers snapped into a fist. The cracking of so many bones reminded Dr. Grosquares of walking over the peanut shell-covered floor of the Pelwanian circus. The white crests of the roses on their robes turned red as they bled from every pore and orifice and flooded the chapel floor in a rush of iron crimson. Those who had not died immediately sobbed and cried and begged for forgiveness. Their desperate, weightless pleas were ignored by the goddess they'd claimed to love, but had attempted to abandon in a moment of pathetic fear. Of course she would be feared. She was a goddess. Lanrith didn't know what to do. This woman, this creature, this horror was too powerful for them to deal with. Like a predator, she would certainly kill them with her strange magic if they tried to run. But staying frozen in fear would lead to their deaths as well once she finally noticed them. The literal lake of blood flooded up around his boots, but he couldn't bring himself to move. No matter how desperately his own voice screamed in his head for him to do something, he was terrified. The doctor didn't even breathe in his peripheral. Nimue had fallen into hysterical, if quiet sobs, and his sister hung limp in the woman's arms. Was she? He couldn't finish the thought as heartache welled in his chest, and those dark eyes landed on him. The gaze of the white rose seeped deeply into his soul. From his bandaged arm, a slow, deliberate warmth began to spread through him, and Lanrith braced himself for pain. He was grateful Erinka would not have to see him distort and break the way the unfaithful thorns had. But then the rose's lips closed into a small O, and her chest expanded and fell as she took a breath with him. He hadn't realized he'd been holding it in, and the rush of air made his head spin. She did it again, and the smell of wet iron, instead of making him feel dizzy, somehow grounded him. She beckoned, and he wasn't aware he'd answered until the soft slush of the blood he waded through made him aware that there was no more screaming. The stolen sword dropped from his hands with a loud splash. The thorns that were still alive jumped, and their heads snapped up to follow him with terrified eyes as he waded through the red to stand before her. She was taller than he, being a few steps up, young in face but old in presence, like Sabia had been. He felt he should offer her his hands, and she took them, unpicking his bonds and sliding her fingers up to where the embroidery of her crest slowly unraveled against his shoulder. You will bring me back to life, she decided, offering him a smile that would have sent him running if the desperate urge to be near her did not keep him from doing so. Instead, he turned to face the chapel when her hands guided him to do so. From the stairs, he could see just barely a handful of thorns left, still kneeling in the carnage. Those who had fallen, covered entirely by their combined fluids. making them feel almost alone in the vast space. The doctor was the only one standing, but his eyes jumped up over Lanrith's shoulder and glazed over before he too took a knee in the blood. A hand with sharp nails tenderly caressed into his hair, tangling into a hold, and another slithered up over his shoulder, along his neck and down his chest. A not considerable weight leaned against his back, and Lanrith was disinclined to resist, as his head was eased to the side. He thought he heard someone screaming, but the warmth spreading through him made him unwilling to fight this. So he let her bite, and closed his eyes as she drank slowly, deliberately. He found himself perfectly content to accept his fate.